Wrestling games are fun, except for when they're not. In the extensive history of the genre, we've seen many games come and go. A lot of them great, but some not so much. It's quite easy to throw together a ranking of the best, but how about the worst? Which of these are truly bad and how many of them deserve a second look? And each game included here must have been released to at least some negative reception, so while titles like WCW Mayhem, TNA Impact, and WWF Warzone might be terrible to some, they garnered just enough praise to avoid making the list. Additionally, these rankings are the opinions of myself and yours will likely vary, so don't, freak out. But with that being said, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on these games. So without further ado, let's get to it. Ah yes, WWE 2K20. Ugly looking character models, constant crashes, a less than appealing story mode, unnecessary control scheme changes, and of course, the bugs. Bugs everywhere. This one was, quite frankly, a complete disaster. It's almost hard to believe this game is a distant relative of SmackDown Here Comes the Pain. The first game in the series since the departure of longtime developer Ukes would prove a bit too much for Visual Concepts to handle, and the response was brutal, with GameSpot giving the game a 2 out of 10. Things would get even worse when it was announced that the following year's release, WWE 2K21, would be citing the pandemic as one of the main reasons, but let's be honest here, we weren't buying that. I don't even think it's the worst game on this list, as there were still some positives to be had here, but taking into consideration how far we'd come by this point and how broken the gameplay was, it was just plain unacceptable. If you've ever played WWF Wrestlemania, the arcade game, you know that the game didn't take itself too seriously. I mean, look at it. And the follow-up, WWF In Your House, would take this to a whole new level. This one focuses heavily on fast-paced fighting game-style mechanics, digitized visuals similar to games like Mortal Kombat, and off-the-wall stages based on the gimmicks of the game's roster. Take on HBK in a nightclub, Goldust in a movie theater lobby, and Owen Hart in whatever this place is supposed to be. Despite the success of its predecessor, the limited roster, dated visuals, lack of gameplay modes, and far-fetched atmosphere didn't exactly do the game many favors. However, despite its flaws, it's actually quite enjoyable and, dare I say, underrated? I remember a time when backyard wrestling was huge. I mean, this stuff was all over the early 2000s internet. What a different time that was. And of course, during this era, anything with even the slightest bit of buzz usually got a video game adaptation. Backyard wrestling Don't Try This at Home was no exception, allowing players to battle it out in not only backyards, but also parking lots and even a strip club. In addition to wrestling moves, the game would encourage the use of weapons and interactive environments to defeat opponents. The roster would consist of indie and backyard wrestlers, as well as some familiar faces like the Insane Clown Posse, Tylene Buck, and even Sabu. And though the story mode was quite shallow, it did feature some almost entertaining cutscenes. The critics didn't have many nice things to say, however. Game Informer gave it a 5.5, GameSpot a 4.7, and Maxim a 2 out of 10. What do they know about video games? Regardless of the mostly negative criticism, Backyard Wrestling 2, There Goes the Neighborhood, would drop the following year with some new faces, including Vic Grimes, Vampiro, Sandman, and musician Andrew W.K. We'd also see more stages, weapons, and match types, but it wasn't enough to win over the journalists because this one performed quite poorly as well, averaging a score of right around 5 out of 10. While I can't sit here with a straight face and tell you these games are good, they did bring me entertainment and are certainly playable. ECW Hardcore Revolution barely missed this list thanks to a few higher than average reviews. However, the game's successor isn't quite as lucky. ECW Anarchy Rules would introduce some new arenas, moves, wrestlers, and even match types, but none of that could save the game from the quickly deteriorating game engine that was introduced back in WWF Warzone. In a way, this game sort of feels like somebody took WWF Attitude and slapped an ECW mod onto it. Actually, that sounds kind of cool. But you know what's not cool? Getting a rating of 3 out of 10. I'm sure the diehard ECW fans have fond memories of this one, and I respect that, but for the more casual gamers, it wasn't very good. This could be the worst entry on the list. Okay, this is definitely the worst. Because Hulk Hogan's main event was released for the 360 Connect, a motion capturing peripheral that had more success as a ghost hunting tool than an actual gaming device. The game was described as boring, ugly, and broken, and I can remember even feeling sad for the old Hulkster when this game dropped, with reviewers giving the game 1s and 2s on a scale of 10, mind you, and many considering this to be one of the worst games of all time. It's safe to say this game doesn't work for me, brother. The Legends of Wrestling series in theory was something I was personally very excited about upon the initial game's announcement. Play as your favorite wrestlers from the past, set in the appropriate time to match. What's not to like? Well, the game was created by the team that brought us WWF Warzone, WWF Attitude, as well as the ECW titles, and while they did finally ditch the aging game engine from those games in favor of something new, it still didn't feel great. Button prompts are delayed, the gameplay is clunky, and let's be honest, it's kind of depressing seeing your favorite superstars you grew up with battling it out in high school gymnasiums. Then there were the visuals of the models, which many thought resembled action figures, but to be fair, that's probably the aesthetic they were aiming for. Despite the mediocre reception, we'd see a Legends of Wrestling 2, which added more wrestlers, game modes, and a slightly tweaked engine to improve gameplay. Regardless, it was received just as poorly as its predecessor, but Acclaim would not be deterred as they would deliver Showdown Legends of Wrestling, the third and final game in the series. This is by far my favorite in the bunch, as many of the roster additions were guys that I grew up watching in the 90s, and these arenas, man, chef's kiss. But Acclaim wasn't exactly known for quality assurance, and that shows here as Showdown was, let's be honest, a bit of a buggy mess. The series as a whole? Yeah, it's playable. Let's start off by pointing out the positives of WCW Nitro on the PlayStation. The roster was stacked, the WCW atmosphere was nailed to a T, from the arenas to the commentary and even the menus. The visuals were good, and who are we kidding, the select screen rants are probably the best part of the entire game. Once the bell rang though, disappointment. I tried ridiculously hard to like this game as a kid, playing it constantly and even getting good at it, but from the awkward movement around the ring, complicated button commands for simple moves, and lack of gameplay modes, it just didn't deliver. EGM gave it a 6.5, and that's probably a little bit generous. It's not broken, but there isn't much fun to be had here. As we've seen a few times already on this list, if a game doesn't quite deliver, just slap a new outfit on it and call it a sequel. No need to actually, improve stuff. That's the story with WCW NWO Thunder, as it's clear to see this is essentially the same exact game with a new coat of paint. I mean, look at these menus. There are a few minor additions here, like the new cage match, which neither functions like a cage match nor has any fans in attendance for some reason. It does have a larger roster than before, but in terms of gameplay, this is Nitro. The full motion video entrances were nice, arena selection was actually beyond impressive for the time, and the massive amounts of cheat codes did help to extend the replay value, if only a bit, but by this time, given what we'd been playing over on the N64, our expectations were much higher. Does it suck? Yes, sir. Do I still play it occasionally? You bet your bottom dollar I do. Royal Rumble on the Dreamcast never really had a fair chance, as the game was designed so that it could be released in the arcades as well. This, of course, means a very limited experience with a stripped-down roster, only a few match types, and one arena option. Its saving grace, however, would be the fact that Ukes, the developers of the SmackDown series, would handle production, so despite its limitations, it's still a high-quality experience, given what's here, of course. The game also boasted the ability to have up to 9 wrestlers on screen all at the same time, which was pretty saucy stuff at the time. There were even entrances, sort of, and explorable backstage areas, kind of. And of course, being a Dreamcast game, the visuals, while not groundbreaking, were better than what we saw in other wrestling titles at the time. I get why this one bombed, but I truly believe there's some decent fun to be had here. After some decent success with the release of WCW Mayhem in 1999, you'd think EA might want to capitalize on the positives, fix some of the criticisms, and deliver a solid product, but it's, did I mention this was EA? Instead, it was decided that, hey, people loved that backstage stuff we did in Mayhem, what if we did that exclusively here? Gone is the wrestling ring and the arena. In its place, environments like restrooms, loading bays, and parking lots filled with burning barrels of flammable materials. Unlike most sequels, gameplay wasn't improved, and somehow visuals got exponentially worse. Yikes. And to think, WCW ditched THQ for these guys. AAA got its own game, and well, if it's on this list, it's not good. Now, don't get me wrong, there are many features here that make it quite enjoyable, like the roster featuring many wrestlers you won't find elsewhere, and unique game modes and match types which I'm certain you'll never ever find elsewhere. Top this with a Create a Wrestler mode, a decent-ish story, and nice visuals, and it sounds like we have a pretty solid game on our hands, but there are some issues. The difficulty is unbalanced, the controls are a bit strange, and the game is riddled with bugs. It just didn't hit with the critics, averaging a review score of right around 5 out of 10. I think it deserves a bit more credit than that though, and is certainly worth checking out at the right price. With the launch of a new generation of consoles, us wrestling fans were salivating at the possibilities that lie ahead. How great could these games become with more powerful hardware? And at least when it came to the Xbox, it wouldn't be long before disappointment would strike. WWF Raw was hyped up online and in magazines as something special, but after delays and multiple instances of cut content, the game that ultimately hit homes in 2002 was anything but. Sure, it looked stunning from a visual standpoint, but the gameplay suffered, the animations were awkward, and it was quite limited, lacking even the essentials such as a Royal Rumble mode, more than one arena option, and ladders you can actually, climb. Believe it or not, some reviewers were blinded enough by the glitz and glam to give it a higher score, but the majority of critics saw the game for what it was, or wasn't. AEW Fight Forever had the recipe for greatness, a powerhouse developer with a history of wrestling titles under their belt in Ukes, and the same director as beloved games like WCW NWO Revenge and WWF No Mercy, the latter of which this game was said to be modeled after. What could possibly go wrong? While there is a story mode with branching paths, it was criticized as being repetitive. Create a Wrestler mode was also panned for being limited, and graphics noted as looking quite dated. Some of the positive comments were aimed at the diverse match inclusions and more arcade-style gameplay. Unfortunately, many bugs were present upon release, and the Switch version was hampered by performance issues. Most reviews were just about average, and today I think many opinions might be a little biased based on how fans feel about the promotion, but either way, I think this one is actually better than it gets credit for. And no, I'm not an AEW fan, I'm just a wrestling game fan. Wrestlemania 21 on the Xbox did a lot of things wrong. Let's just get that out of the way now. Messy controls? Check. Lackluster create mode? Check. Specialty matches that can only be played 1 versus 1 for some reason? Check. Game-breaking bugs and crashes? Oh yeah, check. I will say the game had some absolutely incredible looking visuals, from the wrestlers to the arenas, and the fully voiced story mode was an ambitious inclusion. However, the game as a whole took a step backwards as the replacement for the aforementioned Raw series, and many of us Xbox owners, well, we weren't too happy about it. On a rating scale of 1 to 10, WrestleMania 21 received many 5s, and I'd say that's quite fair. As somebody who ended up fighting the game more than my actual opponent, I'd say this one is quite broken. Well, that's it. That's the list of bad ones. What do you think? I know based on my previous reviews and previous comments that many people actually like many of these games, which is fine. Let me know in the comments which ones you like, which ones you agree with, and let me know what you'd like to see covered next.